Well, greetings, amazing students, and welcome back to another week here with Lifespan Development Sci 120. It's a pleasure to bring you all this week's content. Thank you so much for tuning in. So for this week, our content is going to focus on some foundational work that's important for us to be able to grasp an understanding of in terms of psychology and lifespan development. So in your reading assigned for this week, you will be covering your theorists, all right, and your foundational theorists and the different theoretical frameworks germane to the field of psychology and also to lifespan development. We're going to do a quick recap of those theorists. The idea behind it is not to give you all of the information that you have in the reading. That's what your textbooks are for and what the assigned reading is for. But what I want to do is contextualize the theories that were presented in your textbook and give you a real practical framework for understanding the theorists and their theoretical worldviews so that way you can see how these basic psychological concepts meet and intersect with your future careers and with current societal issues. So we're going to discuss our theorists today. The second thing I'm going to do is present you with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're going to discuss Maslow's hierarchy of needs today. And then the third thing is we're going to tie all of that. We're going to relate our theorists and Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the topic of homelessness and substance dependency. That will be our practical grounding to the content for today. All right. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring up our slides and we will dive in to our discussion. Let's begin with our theorists. Now I know some of you are saying, oh gosh, Dr. Meiko, you're discussing theorists. I'm going to go ahead and get ready for a nice long nap, is what some of you may be thinking. Now, please give me a second here, and I want to make sure that we understand the relevancy of the theories that are involved related to our field of psychology. Now, what I plan on doing is clumping several of the theorists into the theoretical framework that they correspond with, all right, and share some very brief ideas around them. This is important because even though theory seems very lofty, it's something that sometimes makes you want to take a nap when you're reading your textbook. It has direct implications, right, for current societal issues. In this case, we're going to address homelessness and substance dependency, and they have a direct framework application to those two items. Now, over the course of your career, as a nurse, as a speech pathologist, you are bound to encounter situations where you will have a a view of the world that's different from that of your clients. You may have a worldview that's different from that of a colleague, right? That's in the same office with you. And though part of the explanation, not all, okay, of the explanation of understanding our worldview can be explained through our theoretical lens, the lens in which we choose to examine the world around us. Each of the theorists that I'm going to move through in the slides here come with a very different theoretical orientation and worldview. They all see and understand one particular issue in a different way, all right? The key here is to understand what theoretical orientation you find yourself drawn to the most that aligns with your worldview, but you also want to understand the different worldviews because they all have an interesting way of understanding, examining the social problems around you. So let's get started, okay? The first theory or theoretical orientation I'd like to explain is psychodynamic theory. Psychodynamic theory. Psychodynamic theorists involve Sigmund Freud and Erik Erikson. I put pictures of them here, Freud and Erikson, right? And there were some key, some fundamental tenets of psychodynamic theory, which we want to be aware of. So the key idea is that behavior, according to a psychoanalyst, right, is behaviors throughout life is motivated by inner unconscious forces stemming from childhood over which we have little control. So if you were talking to Freud or Erikson, one might say that they believe is that a lot of the feelings and behaviors that you have had early in your lifespan and are to come later in your lifespan stem from your childhood, and they may be motivated by this inner voice that's telling you to expect or behave a certain way based on experiences you had as a child that you don't realize are even there, sometimes referred to as the subconscious, okay? And so in the back of our mind, there's this voice that's playing in our head at different levels of our consciousness that say, hey, you've had these experiences as a child, therefore you should perceive the world as such. And since you see the world that way, you will act accordingly, okay? So that's one idea. Now, there's another group of theorists that came about after psychoanalysis that were the behavioral theorists, okay? So they fall under the notion of behavioral theory. Theorists such as John Watson, Skinner, and Albert Bandura were your behavioral theorists. Now, behavioral theorists believe that development can be understood through studying observable behavior and environmental stimuli. Remember that conversation we had last week on nature versus nurture? Well, behavioral theorists would say, look, a lot of what motivates an individual to behave the way they do throughout their lifespan is a result of behavioral, observable environmental stimuli. That if we were to follow this person around and watch them interact with the world, we would see that the stimuli that they encounter lead them to behave and develop a certain way. It's mostly mostly nurture, the environment that's impacting them, and we can see that impact through their behavior. Okay, the trauma they experienced, the joy they've experienced, all of those opportunities blend together and cause an individual to behave the way they do. Okay. Now, another group of theorists were your cognitive theorists. Your cognitive theorists, Jean Piaget. Piaget is primarily assigned or given credit to the notion of cognitive theory. And cognitive theory is this emphasis on how changes or growth in the way people know and understand and think about the world affect behavior. And so over a period of time, Jean Piaget believed that our cognitive framework, the way that we thought cognitive about the world, would change over a period of time, and that would in turn affect their behavior. And so what we experience from cognitive theorists is that we, like I was saying in the beginning of the class, will not be the same person of who we are 20 years from now is who we are now. And that's because over time of experiencing life, behaviors, right, impacting us, we start to see the world and think of the world differently. And as a result of that, we respond to the world differently. Okay, so our experiences inform our thought impacts our behaviors, and as a result, we choose to behave differently with the world around us. Now, there's also a set of theorists called humanistic theorists. Humanistic theorists are your Carl Rogers and your Abraham Maslow. We're going to talk about Maslow in particular in the next couple of slides. Humanistic theorists believe that behavior is chosen through free will and motivation by our natural capacity to strive to reach our full potential. Your humanistic theorists believe that human beings at the very essential level are always striving to reach our full potential. We're always trying to be the best possible version of ourselves. And therefore, we consider ourselves free agents in this world, not bound completely by nature, right, by genetics, but that we are motivated inherently, right, to try to be the best that we can be. So some of you may look at that and say, interesting, I don't necessarily agree with that theory. I don't know if everyone's striving to reach their full potential. But humanistic theorists would believe, on the whole, yes, that's how we're wired, is to achieve that potential, but there are external stimuli that may come in the way of that. Things like maltreatment, abuse, neglect, poverty, those may come in the way, but still we strive to reach our full potential. So that is our humanistic theorists. Just a couple more with me, bear with me now. We also have a group of theorists called your contextual theorists. This is where your theorists like Bronfenbrenner and Vygotsky, okay, in particular, drew together some frameworks for understanding human behavior. And these contextual theorists would say that development should be viewed in terms of the interrelationship of a person's physical, cognitive, personality, and social worlds. They're saying, look, there's more going on to a person, the nature and nurture, that there's a complex mix going on within a person. How they think, feel, right, develop as a human being in terms of their body, their physiology, and their personality, they all are mixed together in this notion of human development, that there's an internal discussion, struggle, development process that goes on that shapes us. And that is how we develop, right? With these mindsets, these factors at play. So that's our contextual theorists. What contextual theorists believe is that what's going on in the world around us, our nurture, right, portion of that, the environment, heavily impacts the way that we view and respond to the world around us. So if we grow up in a time of conflict, if we grow up in a time of prosperity, if we grow up in a time of stability, if we grow up in a time of instability, that all of these factors, these context in which we are interacting with the world, impact the way that we develop. Okay. Finally, the last group of theorists would refer to Darwin and Lorenz, for example, and these are evolutionary theorists. You're probably very familiar with these theorists. So evolutionary theorists believe that behavior is the result of genetic inheritance and our ancestors. So we're talking about nurture here, right? Traits and behavior that are adaptive for promoting the survival of our species have been inherited through natural selection. And this is a component of our evolutionary theorists. Natural selection, often sometimes referred to as survival of the fittest. So some of you may have heard this before, that nature is simply survival of the fittest. And what Darwin and Lorenz would hang their hats on is they would say that a lot, very, very much, the large percentage of our existence and our development, our behavior is based off of our genetic inheritance, our nature, what we are prone to do. In fact, the human species, according to these theorists, is that we perpetuate, we exist, in essence, really, so that the strongest will survive, so the species continues. And when we interfere with that, when we consider making laws and safety precautions and things to keep people alive, we're almost kind of like diluting the gene pool, if you will. And that species over time has evolved only because the strongest members of that species have survived. They've pressed on, and as a result, that species has continued to perpetuate over time because of this genetic drive, okay? And so a lot of what Darwin and Lorenz would say is that nurture doesn't have so much to do with it. If you're tough enough, you'll survive, and that perpetuates, right, your species, your development of your future, in our case, humanity or human race, okay? And so these are a summary of our theorists. Now, some of you may be saying, okay, that's great. I have some background on the categories of our theoretical orientations, but I still don't understand their application to your everyday life. That's completely fair. We're going to go into that in a second here, okay? Here's what I'd like to do. Obviously, you're not gathering in groups. You're with me online. So I'd like you to just jot down really, really quickly on a piece of paper. You can pause after I ask this question. I'd like you to write on a piece of paper 5 underlying reasons why you think a person may be addicted to a substance. So on a piece of paper, write down 5 reasons why someone may be addicted to substances, okay? Write those down and then come back to this recording. All right, so what I'm going to do is, once you've got those 5 down, let's go ahead and pick up. And so you've got your 5 reasons why an individual you feel may be addicted to substances. Now, what I'm going to do is we're actually going to look at this very question, and we're going to answer that question, but we're going to answer it aligned with our theorist. So, for example, we're going to look at psychoanalysis, and we're going to say, what would our psychodynamic theorists say is the reason, excuse me, why a person may be addicted to substances? We'll look at our contextual theorists or cognitive theorists, and we'll see what they have to say. So let's look at this issue of substance dependency not only from our own eyes, but let's look at it from the eyes of our theorists. What would these theorists say? And then what I'd also like you to do is, as you're holding on to your list and I'm going through the perspectives of these theorists, think about where your theoretical orientation aligns the most, okay? So if we were to look at substance dependency, for example, psychodynamic theorists, right, your Freud and all of that would say that substance dependency suggests that a young adult who abuses substances might be using them to cope with deep-rooted issues of parental abuse or neglect, right? So Freud would step back and say, you know what, your substance dependency that's impacting your life, your reliance upon insert any drug, right? Alcohol, cannabis, whatever that's the flavor of the week is, right? Stems from trauma you experienced as a child, and you're having difficulty coping with that throughout your lifespan. So as a result, that explains your substance dependency. Behavioral theorists will look at that a little bit differently. Behavioral theorists would say a young adult who abuses substances when triggered by an environmental stress, such as crowds, noise, specific friends, or family members. They may say, look, you may have had experiences as a child, but it's not so much that. It's actually the fact that when you get out into your environment, because of the trauma you experience, you're more prone or sensitive to environmental stimuli. So as a result, when you are triggered by outside behavior, noise, stress, right? Maybe it's the holidays, maybe it's large group gatherings, maybe it's public speaking, whatever the case is, you turn to the substances to cope with those stressors, okay? Cognitive theorists would say a young adult who abuses substances hasn't learned healthy ways to cope with triggers and does not value sobriety. So sometimes you'll hear individuals say, well, you know what, someone that's using maybe in their younger years, in their college years, things like this, maybe it's experimental. Maybe they'll explain to us, oh, that phase is going to pass. That usage is just a phase. But we know there's a danger in that, right? Because we obviously see for some students, maybe it is a phase. Maybe they go through periods of usage in their life and then suddenly they decide not to use anymore. But we also see a number of individuals where that usage continues into their adulthood, right? Leading to an early death. A cognitive theorist would say, look, an individual was maybe raised in an environment where over the course of their lives and their childhood, they were always taught that when life gets difficult, you use to ease that stress. That when I can't pay the bills, well, I can still drink or do drugs, right? If there's a conflict at home and the husband and the wife aren't talking, you can use drugs and you can get past that rough patch. If I lose my job, it's okay. I'm going to be at the bar for a few hours, and that's how I'm going to cope with how I'm feeling. If I don't say anything at all, maybe I drink instead of speaking about my emotions. That can also come from a place of this cognitive notion of what I was taught as a child was substances equate to coping with stress. A cognitive theorist might say if we were to teach a new way of coping with stress to this client, we could substitute, right, that drinking for a different behavior. That what if we taught them that working out, right, was as effective in terms of relieving stress as drinking, probably more effective, right, and less harmful to the body. And we were to emphasize and teach the benefits of exercise instead, that an individual might turn to exercise instead of substances in order to cope with stressors. Maybe that's reading, maybe that's meditation, right? Maybe that's talking to a pastor. Either way, cognitive means we think about a behavior one way, and if we were to substitute that coping strategy with another, the person can think about doing something different instead of turning to substances. A humanistic theorist may say a young adult may eventually choose to seek a sober lifestyle as part of an overall pattern of individual growth. They say, look, remember, this is the theorists that say we're always striving to reach like the best version of ourselves. And so they may say, look, as part of that phase, what we're seeing is that substance dependency fulfilled some aspect of their life, a void that they were looking for at that point in their life. But over time, it just got boring to them. It wasn't part of their plan anymore. Like maybe the substances was tied to having this college experience. But what they realized was once college was coming to an end, they were saying, you know what, this phase is coming to an end. I've got to move on to a career or graduate school or whatever the case was. And they said, as a result, this doesn't fit into my life. And I'm moving on, right, to another stage, a version of myself, if you will. So that's how a humanistic theorist might explain it. Contextual theorists might say, look, substance abuse is caused by a number of interrelated factors in that person's physical, cognitive, personality, and social worlds. A contextual theorist may say, look, there's a lot going on, is that a lot of it has to do with context of the environment of the individual. When we study the habits of some individuals who are addicted to substances, we often see that there is a ritual, okay, involved with it. That for, let's take an alcoholic, for example, that they may have the same routine, right? The same ritual established to their usage. So let's say every day they get off work at the same time. Maybe they get off at 5 p.m. They're tired and stressed from their day, and they immediately turn to alcohol to begin to cope with the stressors of that day. We find that they hop in their car, take the same path to get home every day, and they stop at the same liquor store on that same path to get home every day. And they buy the same bottle of the same brand of alcohol, excuse me, every single day. And they go home and they sit in the same chair and they watch the same show and they drink the same alcohol until eventually, they pass out. And the idea behind it is that in context, maybe we can address substance dependency by changing the ritual, the aspect of the ritual in that person's life. We change the pattern and therefore we change the usage. So some individuals may say, instead of taking the same way home every day, try a different route. Don't try to stop at the same liquor store, right, to get the same drink. Some may say even try to switch drinks, right, so that you're not drinking the same thing. It doesn't become habit, and maybe you'll grow tired of the drinking. Or when you get home, try to limit the amount of drinks that you have, or, something like that. And so a contextual theorist may say, let's break the ritual of usage in order to try to break the cycle of abuse that takes place. Okay. So there's that. Now, finally, our evolutionary theorists, remember, this is the notion of survival of the fittest, right? May believe that simply a person is addicted to substances because there's a genetic flaw that exists in that individual or in their family history, which is contributing to a thinning of the herd dynamic. It's a cold way of kind of looking at the world, of saying, look, this person was born inherently flawed and prone to addiction. And as a result, they're going to be an addict. And so they just make bad choices because that's who they are at that cellular level. And again, I'm not saying I agree with all of these mindsets. I'm simply explaining them through the eyes of our theorists. So I'd like you to stop and kind of consider which one of these theories, contextual, evolutionary, right, cognitive, humanistic, psychodynamic, or behavioral, do you find yourself most aligning with? We all have a worldview, and then what will happen is that we may have our colleagues or even the clients or the patients that we're serving coming in with their own worldview on what they believe causes their substance dependency. So you want to be able to examine this from different theoretical frameworks. It turns out our theorists have a lot to say and contribute to our understanding of really relevant issues like substance dependency, okay? Now, I'd like to talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs since we're talking about our theorists. As you remember, Maslow was one of our theorists that we discussed, and he developed this concept of a hierarchy of needs. He first drafted this in 1943 and then went on in 1954 to kind of upload more of that, if you will, update, his model. And so Maslow, if you were to picture Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a big triangle, like you see on the screen, right? A triangle that's here. And at the bottom, the base is foundational, right? The base supports the rest of the levels of the triangle. That would be where we start as human beings. And what Maslow identified was that at the base of all human development and existence is that every one of us first seeks to meet our physiological needs, right? Our physiological needs are the things we need to survive and as a species or as individuals. Air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction. These are necessary if we are to survive as a species, right? And so Maslow said at the very base of our existence, first, what we must take care of before anything else are our physiological needs. Once our physiological needs have been met, we can move on to worrying about other aspects of our lives, and that's safety. All right. So, safety, things like personal security. Am I safe? Employment, right? Like, do I have a steady job and a steady paycheck? Do I have resources around me? Maybe that's a car. Maybe that's food, right? Maybe that is a paycheck to go and buy groceries or gasoline. My health, is it stable? Do I have property? Do I can go and sleep in the same place every day and feel safe and secure? Maslow would say after our physical needs are met, safety comes into play. Maslow then says if we can meet our needs of our safety, we can move on to another aspect of our being, which is love and belonging. So he says after these two needs have been met in the pyramid, then we move on to talk about things like friendship, intimacy, family, senses of connection. When you feel safe, when you have your physiological needs met, now you're saying, okay, I can develop a friend. I can go and try to date, right? And meet a partner that maybe becomes my spouse later on in life. I can think about having a family. I can have this sense of connection, of camaraderie with someone. I build relationships because you're in that place. Your basic needs have been met. Well, Maslow says after that has taken place, after you have all these things here have taken place, you can move on to another layer, right, of your hierarchy, and that's to meet the needs of your esteem. So things like respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, or freedom. Think about that. For many of you, this is where you're trying to head in your life right now, from love and belonging into esteem. Maybe you're migrating into these areas here. You're going to school to earn a degree, to have a career, to have titles behind your name, to give yourself purpose, right? So that you can tell your kiddos, I did it. I went to college, right? You can tell your family I had the strength to continue. I believe I'm free to make my own choices in life. And so you may be in this esteem moment, okay? Finally, after that, after you've achieved that esteem, Maslow said that then there was this process of self-actualization. At the top of the pyramid was self-actualization. It was the desire to become the most that we could be. That we strove after we had the degree, after you crossed the stage at CBU and became a nurse, You had this desire to be the best possible professional you could be. You wanted to lead the field in your practice. You wanted to maybe innovate in some way. You maybe wanted to work with new clients or new technology, but you're always striving to be the best possible version of yourself that you could, right? Remember, it sounds like that theorist, right? That humanistic theory, right? And it's interesting that later on in his career, Maslow actually said, after all of these things, I understand here, right? There was one more level that exists in my research that I didn't realize was there before. Let me share that with you. In 1969, Maslow added one more level above self-actualization, and that was self-transcendence. What Maslow believed was after the physiological, the safety, the belonging, the esteem, the self-actualization were met, human beings then kind of stopped for a second and said, now what else is there, right? Like my needs are met, I'm not starving, I've got a solid house, I live in a good neighborhood, I've got friends, I have a husband or a wife, right, that loves me, I've got a family, I love my job, I'm good at it. And then he said human beings started to ask that question, what else is there? What else is beyond that, right? Now, to some of us with a Christian worldview, we say that's our longing, our journey, our connection to Christ, right? We're saying we recognize that even all these things, as good as they are, as grateful as we are for them, there's something more than that. There's something beyond that. And so self-transcendence is where we're headed, okay? This connection to something greater, this connection beyond ourselves. What's important to note about all of this, oh, sorry, let me go back here, is that we can find ourselves moving up or down in the scale at any moment in our lives based on what's going on in our lives, right? Let's take, for example, that everything's good in my life right now, right? And I'm connected with God and I see the purpose that God has given me in my life and in my career. And let's say that there's a sudden death in the family, God forbid, right? And as a result of that, I'm forced to have to move out of my house, right? We've lost an income in the household. We're making less money. Financially, things are getting more and more difficult, right? You may see me moving down the scale. You may see me moving from self-transcendence and I'm falling into this place of safety and security because I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to pay the mortgage next week. I'm not exactly sure if I can afford all of the groceries or gas. And so I'm starting to tilt back and forth between safety and physiology, right? Because I'm unsure where I am. But then let's say that that life matter, is able to be resolved, right? I'm able to get that income back again. I might slowly start to see myself moving up the pyramid again, right? Of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The whole idea is that some of the clients that you are going to be serving, your patients in the ER that are coming in on a Sunday night, right, at 2 a.m. and it's freezing cold and raining outside. And now they're saying, I need to go to the ER for all of the ailments that I'm having, if not only just to have a warm place to sleep, are not coming to you in this stage of esteem or even self-belonging, not even sometimes safety or security. They're coming to you because their basic needs are trying to be met. Right? It's cold, it's freezing outside. I have a medical need and I put it off for a long time, but I just can't sleep out there anymore. I'm coming into the ER, right? So that I can be seen and I can just sleep in a warm place and maybe have something to eat. And that does happen in hospitals, right? So you have to recognize and look for, where are my clients in this scale? If they're still in their physiological place or safety, we can't talk to them about what they want to do with their career, right? We can't talk to them about when they're going back to school or how they're going to look for that job. Their most basic needs are just trying to be met. And so we want to be able to recognize where our clients are at. Speaking of which, what I'm going to do here, don't worry, it's not like a pop quiz for points, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some phrases up on the board, and I want you to kind of look at this pyramid here, right? So we have all of these stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to give you some phrases that maybe you hear from your client, right? Or someone in your life. And I want you to see if you can recognize which stage of the pyramid they're on. Okay. So are you ready? Let's start with this one. What if a patient tells you when they come into the exam room, I'm starving, right? I'm starving. I haven't eaten like in the last 2 days, right? I'm just so hungry. What stage of Maslow's hierarchy of needs would they be in? Okay. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. 2, 1. What do you think? Here's the answer. Physiological. Very good. So if you're thinking physiological, you're thinking this is what my client's articulating to me, right? Their basic needs need to be met first. Second phase, why won't they invite me to lunch, right? You got a client that's like, hey, I really like that group, but they never seem to invite me to lunch. I've been kind of down about that. What stage of hierarchy of needs would they be on? I'm going to give you 3 seconds. 2, 1. You ready? Here we go. Love and belonging. Very good. So if you said love and belonging, this is where they're at. Let's look at another phase here. I can be a nurse or speech pathologist if I work very hard. Okay, I know you all are saying that right now. So what phase of stage of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are you in right now? I'm going to give you 3 seconds. 2, 1. Very good. Esteem, right? You're striving to achieve something, maybe status, degree, whatever the case is in your life. Very good. Just a couple more. Can you leave the light on when you leave, please? Right? Maybe it's a child that you're working with in a hospital setting or as a speech pathologist. Hey, can you leave the light on before you leave? What place in the hierarchy of needs would this child be at? In 3 seconds, 2, 1. Safety. Very good. Safety. All right. I'm happy doing this job. It doesn't feel like work, right? I love coming to work every day. I enjoy it so much, right? What are they telling you? What stage of this the hierarchy of needs is this person at? 3, 2, 1. Self-actualization. Excellent job. Self-actualization. That's that top. Remember, prior to like 19, what was it, 53 or 7, something like that. But prior to 1969, right? And finally, maybe one day a client asks you, who's God, right? And why am I here? I've done all the things, right? I've got the family, I've got the car, I've got the house, I've got the food, everything's good. And I'm still wondering why I'm here. What stage is that person asking you about or indicating they're in? Transcendence. That's correct. That top of that stage, Maslow added in 1969. Okay. So again, here's another example of a theorist and their work that reflects your future practice in recognizing where people are at. Now, I want to talk really briefly, and we're going to talk about theorists then in regards to homelessness, and I'm going to make this pretty quick, all right, for us. So we won't spend a huge time on this, but let's connect, right, the theorists to another current issue besides substance dependency. So I want to talk about homelessness in a broad sense, in a national sense. So in 2023, the homeless crisis in the United States had seen a significant and concerning rise. The annual homelessness assessment report released by the Department of Housing and Urban Development estimated that approximately 653,000 individuals were experiencing homelessness on any given night in our country, making a 12% increase from the previous year. Imagine that every night here in the United States, 653,000 people, right, are experiencing homelessness that night. This increase in particular is alarming, reflecting the highest number of individuals reported as unhoused since such data being collected in 2007. What we are seeing is still there are more individuals who are unhoused, and it's growing every single year. This trend is continuing to increase. So this is important because, like I said, in your medical professions, you are going to see individuals rushing into the ER in climates of snow, wind, rain, even extreme heat, looking for a hospitable place to be and to sleep and to eat, simply because it is inhospitable out in the environment. This will impact your practice, okay? Now, a couple of other statistics related to homelessness. Current data indicates that around 150 million people were homeless worldwide, and that was in 2023, a significant increase from previous annual estimates. And this crisis is compounded by the fact that as many as 1.6 billion people, lack adequate housing, demonstrates the vast scale of housing insecurity that extends beyond the visibility of the homeless population. So this factors in not only the individuals who we see maybe sleeping in their cars or under an overpass or on the street, but we also have to recognize that people are just teetering on that border of homelessness, where if they don't have a couch to sleep on the next night, they may very well be out on the street, or they're just 2 paychecks away from losing their house and finding themselves in this situation. And so when we factor that in, we want to also understand homelessness in and of itself is not only a challenge to the United States, but it is a global challenge that the world is facing, okay? Now, research also indicates that mixed race ethnicity, single mother who was poor as a child, renting at the age of 26, and who has experienced unemployment has a predicted probability of homelessness of 71.2% by the age of 30. Picture it this way then. Think about your theorists, right? And what they're saying about life and experiences and challenges and how we see the world. What research tells us is that this demographic here of a mixed race or ethnicity single mother, low income, right, doesn't own a home and is relatively young, 26 is very young, and who has lost her job, has a 71% chance of becoming homeless by the age of 30. Think about that. Think about you in your own life, right? You're younger than 26 for many of you. Think about maybe your aunts, your uncles, your cousins who are in this age group. They're before the age of 30. And imagine being able to predict, right, the notion, the statistical likelihood of homelessness for this population, something we always want to be attuned to, okay? And yet, even though we see this, right, we see all this global data, this national data, and we see these indicators, predictors of homelessness, here are the attitudes that we see on message boards and social media, debates around the table around the unhoused. You'll hear people say, well, all those homeless people, listen to this, all these homeless people, and what we say is the unhoused individuals, that's what we say in the helping professions. But you'll hear people say, look, those unhoused people, those homeless people are just crazy. Or you know what, they're lazy. That's why they're in this situation. Or some people will even be sarcastic saying, just must be nice to sleep all day. Or why don't they just go out and get a job instead of asking for handouts? Some of them, they say, actually want to be on the streets, and some of them never applied themselves in life. Do you hear the judgment in the language here? Well, one of the things that I want to encourage us of 17 years working in the field of child welfare and of social work is that when we say that homelessness, all right, when we examine the topic of homelessness, we say homelessness is a situation, it's not a person, okay? We don't judge the person for them finding themselves without housing. I'm going to share a good reason why we don't want to do that. But there's a couple of things to consider. When someone says something like, it's nice to see this, must be nice to sleep all day when they see someone sleeping on the street, what they often forget is that individuals who are unhoused are often sleeping during the day because they've stayed up all night. And why have they stayed up all night? Because they're worried of being attacked, murdered, assaulted for their things, okay? And so individuals, if they want to sleep, they cannot sleep at night because they're more susceptible to being hurt overnight. And so they sleep during the day, often in public settings where you can see them, to try to prevent something from happening to them on the streets, right? And so we want to be able to understand the notion of the situation of being unhoused rather than judge the person for their situation. So I want to take everything that we discussed today, our theorists and our Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember, individuals who are unhoused are at the bottom of this notion of the unhoused, okay? They're at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid. And so what we want to do is be able to talk about and understand and develop empathy for those individuals who will be coming in, and you may see them in your future career. What I'm going to do is share a video with you, and it's going to be from the perspective of an actual student that's doing a project on the unhoused here in Riverside, okay, quick YouTube video. And I want you to hear the stories of the individuals who are in this film and this video, and listen to where they are in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Listen to Maslow's theory coming to life as you hear the discussions in this video. It's short, probably we're only going to cover roughly about 3 minutes, but it's very helpful, okay? So let's watch this video. Listen for Maslow's.
Riverside County's federally mandated count shows that homelessness has increased by 11% since last year. The Calvary Presbyterian Church has been relieving some of this pressure every Sunday night since 1985 by providing a meal to the homeless community in Riverside. I got the opportunity to interview a few of them and ask them about their respective homeless experience.
I've been homeless since I was 13. I went to foster care, and then I got out at 18. I've been homeless on and off, this time for almost 7 years. And I don't understand how they can classify people such as myself, because we're out here on the streets as, scums and, just the bottom of the pile, and I just don't understand that.
You got women and children out here that don't know nothing but drugs. That's all they turn to. That's why they turn to prostitution. That's why they turn to whatever, having pimps and all this old craziness. Because they have nobody to stand behind them.
Had people when I'm sleeping jump me in my sleep, because they wanted what I had. Have to get up and fight for what's mine, And I'll do it today and tomorrow.
A following night, we stumbled upon Shannon, a homeless resident of Riverside that kindly shared her space with us.
I was actually living in High Grove at a halfway house for people with mental illness. Both my husband and I suffer from bipolar illness and schizoaffective, but we now get the shot. So anyway, code enforcement shut us down and we ended up out in the street. My husband's incarcerated for beating somebody up that put hands on me. So it's rough out here sometimes.
So where do you get the shots? Are the shots for schizophrenia?
Mine is for bipolar, his is for schizophrenia. But I have a doctor through Medicare, Medi-Cal that I get that. Okay. So I'm doing good considering. But mine is environmental too. There's a lot of things that exacerbate my illness when I'm out here because all the stuff that goes on, it's hard, it takes a toll. Like chain smoking all the time because you're under so much stress. You look at somebody wrong and they want to slap you. I had some guys stalking me, saying they're going to rape and kill me. So it's scary sometimes. But you learn to network with people real quick so that you have people that will protect you and look out after you.
My little sister who accompanied me also decided to ask a question.
Steal your things when you're going to take the trash out?
No, it's usually when I fall asleep. Yeah, so you learn how to put all your valuables in one spot, usually under the pillow, or like my purse. And a lot of times I have to disguise my stuff to look like trash, so they think that I don't have valuables in there. The valuables are where the trash is, and you see what I'm saying? And I even had gopher traps in my shopping cart at one point. Yeah.
All right, let me pause there. So, as you can see, I was hoping you could see and hear Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, in this discussion. If you heard, it was a very practical examples described by individuals who are unhoused discussing their situation. And they're saying, look, I do use and I do turn to substances. We see people doing that and making decisions that they know aren't the best for them because they're still in that physiological sense. They're still just trying to have their basic needs met. They're trying to figure out where they're going to eat, where they're going to sleep, if they're going to be safe. You heard the environmental stressors. Remember the discussion of nature versus nurture and how some theorists believe, look, environment has a lot to do with our human behavior and development. You heard the individual at the end, the lady that was there describing she had to chain smoke all the time because she's so stressed about being hurt or stalked or assaulted on the street. And so you can hear these individuals are operating in this sense, right, of trying to survive every day. So when someone says to them, get up and get a job, how are they going to get a job when they have no ID, when you have no birth certificate, when you're worried about just where your food's going to come from? How are you going to make it to City Hall, right? Catch a ride, catch a bus, do whatever you need to do, looking the way you do, right, in the clothes that you're in, and try to start over. They need help, right? Individuals need help to accomplish this. And so this is why it's so important to have an understanding of our theoretical backgrounds and orientations to help explain some of these phenomena, okay? Now, I want to talk really about, we're going to skip that for a second because for time, I want to make sure that we have time to go over this. Remember when I said that housing, homelessness is not a person, it's a situation. And this is why it's important, because what many folks don't understand is that statistically, the middle class living in the United States is just 2 paychecks away from being homeless themselves. So for us as the middle class, what statistically we see is if our income in our house were to stop, stop tomorrow, if we no longer had any money coming in, most of the middle class doesn't have a strong savings and would be just 2 paychecks away from falling into a place where they could end up homeless, okay? And so think about where in our lives our situation could change, right? Not us as people, but our situation could change, which could result if we didn't have a strong family support system, if we didn't have friends, if we didn't have somewhere we would couch surf, if we didn't have a savings, we too could be on the streets, right? So think about these 10 things that as social workers we assess that could impact individuals and end up finding themselves unhoused. Could you ever become involved in a fire, flood, tornado? We know we live in Southern California. Floods and fires are frequent. People have lost their homes in LA, right? Hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes in LA just this year, right, as a result of these fires, right? Extremely tragic. Some of these individuals will end up unhoused. Do you or your family work in an area of the job market where your job might become obsolete? Think about that, right? Maybe your job just stops tomorrow because of AI or other technology, and they have to suddenly find a whole new career. Maybe they won't even make the same money. Could you ever suffer a long-term illness or accident without proper healthcare benefits or compensation? For some of you, maybe you have family members, like I have my father-in-law who's a landscaper, right? If he were to be injured, he doesn't work and he has to pay his medical bill, right? That could change his financial situation strongly. Could a downturn in the economy or change in your local economy cause you or your family to lose their job, right? A recession, for example, hitting. Do you live in a household where there's only one full-time wage earner and suddenly that person is unable to work, right? Let's look at a couple of others here. Are housing costs in your area increasing faster than the wages, right? Think about that. I think about that in the area that I live in, right? I'm in Colton, and there's a house right up the street from me that's selling for $858,000 in Colton, California, right? Think about the median household income in Colton. It's not going to be enough to pay for an $858,000 house. So how do people make it work living in neighborhoods where the housing market is astronomically higher than the median income, for individuals in that neighborhood? Does anyone in your family struggle with alcohol addictions, drugs, or anything like that? As a result, right? Maybe they lose a job, maybe they need to go to treatment, and as a result of that, either babysitting changes or income changes or something like that. And do you and your family have money or savings or life insurance to cover the expenses should a spouse die unexpectedly, right? If my wife were to pass away, God forbid, or if I were to pass away, right? We're a two-income household. That income is literally being cut in half, right? So we have to talk about how would that work for us, right? If something like that were to happen. Okay. All right. So again, housing is not a person, it's a situation. It's a situation. So thoughts to consider with that, right? It's a situation, not a person. It's not always due to poor choices. Nothing here in this previous slide right here results in poor choices for a family. They are life circumstances that happen that can impact a person's ability to be housed. Most individuals without housing also have children, something to consider. So while we're judging individuals based off of the choices they made, we forget that we're also judging, right, or failing to reach out to help the children who are also impacted by this situation. So anything like a job loss, foreclosure, medical expense, right, all of those things can lead to an ocean of homelessness, okay? All right. Finally, I'm going to leave us with just a couple of things. We're not going to go through all the theorists again, but I want to examine what a couple of theorists would say, right, about what might cause, right, homelessness, right, based off of their theoretical orientation. So a psychoanalyst would say that an individual without housing may possess feelings of worthlessness as a child. They may say, look, they were abused and neglected as a child. They were never able to cope with that. And so they had a hard time adjusting into later in their lifespan into middle adulthood or adolescence. And as a result, they may find themselves in that situation. A cognitive theorist may say an individual may not have learned the skills to apply for a job, maintain employment, or function successfully in life. I certainly did see a little bit of this when I worked with foster youth, right? Foster youth who were being raised in systems, in group homes, and in institutions rather than in a home environment didn't have the opportunity to learn some of those skills on how to do your laundry, how to cook for yourself, right? How to sit down and do homework in a non-distracting environment because they were raised within an institution and not a family setting. So I could see how maybe sometimes that might be relevant. Contextual theorists may say homelessness is caused by a number of interrelated factors, right? Maybe their mental health and their environment. You heard that woman, the woman who shared about her background in chain smoking and things. Well, she also disclosed she had a mental health disorder, right? She had schizophrenia. And so she had a mix of substance dependency and mental health concerns. We call that co-occurring or dual diagnosis. And as a result of that, that can be very difficult to manage. And you definitely need a support system around you, not only of mental or medical care, but you also need a strong support system of friends or family to see you through those difficult times, okay? Finally, what I'm going to do here is we are going to go ahead and end our lesson for today. All right. And so we're going to go ahead and move into our centering exercise for this lesson. And our centering will come from John chapter 1, verse 5. And our scripture verse is going to be, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it. And the word that I selected for today is hope. And there's a reason why I'm going to use that word in particular. I know that oftentimes when I talk about issues like this, of homelessness, of substance dependency, it can feel kind of hopeless. You can start to wonder, gosh, can I ever make a difference in this world when I start to see the staggering numbers of national data or global data around homelessness, or when I start to understand more the complexity of substance dependency. But I don't want us to lose hope, right? I still remain hopeful in these situations because I know that there are other change agents that are going out in the world in the form of nurses or speech pathologists or whatever your major intends to be or where God takes you, to go out and spread the word and to spread God's love to everyone who's on the margins. And I know that the more individuals who choose to go out and live their lives that way, that all is not lost, that you will be a light in the darkness and the darkness will not overcome your love for Jesus manifested in others. And so I want us to hold on to this notion of hope today. So for the remaining time of the lesson, all I'm going to ask us to do is go ahead and take a nice deep breath. And as you breathe in, close your eyes and let's forget all about the worries or concerns that you've brought with you. As you exhale, give those to God. As you inhale, I want you to draw closer into God's presence. And He's speaking to you saying, I'm here. There's always hope. A light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it. And exhale and draw closer to God's presence with you right now in this moment. Stay with that scripture for just a few moments as we center, and then we'll come back. Okay, go ahead and take a nice deep breath. Open your eyes. Come on back. All right, folks, I want to sincerely thank you for diving into the lecture content again this week. Please feel free to email me with any questions, thoughts, concerns that you have. I'm happy to set up office hours with you. Thank you all so much. God bless. Have a good one.